What's that social news aggregation website for fedora-wearing nerds? Oh yeah, Reddit. One of the most popular places on the internet, a website that receives more traffic than Netflix. Yeah, that little company has been eyeing an initial public offering since late 2021. The company is alleged to be going public, finally, later this year. This means that it's time to clean up their image for Wall Street. They've got to attempt to cut costs, they've got to diversify revenue streams, but how on earth are they going to do this? The old standby, by screwing over everyone that made the website a success to begin with. This week, the company announced its new API pricing for the dozens of iOS and Android apps that serve Reddit to millions of its most active users, posters, and creators. The new pricing is insane. And following what Twitter did just a few months ago is a clear move that's sure to abolish the entire ecosystem of third-party apps that brought the site its popularity to begin with. Despite Reddit literally saying they wouldn't pull a Twitter, they did. The most popular Reddit client, Apollo, would need to pay Reddit an insane $20 million per year just to continue operations for its 1.5 million active users. Operations that were previously free and even encouraged by Reddit. I had the opportunity to sit down with Christian Selig, Apollo's developer, and discuss why the changes, even if necessary, are either catastrophically incompetent or utterly malevolent. This video is sponsored by your mom. Christian, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Quinn, long-time fan. Pleasure to be here.
I appreciate it. I think I hate the word fan, but you certainly have known of my existence for a while because you tried to goad me into using Apollo in the first place by adding a custom Snazzy Labs icon to the app, which is
honestly, no, and it had some effect, didn't it?
It worked. Well, so I had been a Narwhal user for years, and I think I had just become comfortable with it. I don't remember what had happened. I think it was an update that Narwhal published that kind of botched stuff a little bit, and so I thought, okay, I'll finally try Apollo and give it a real shot for like a week, and then we'll see where I end up. And I haven't turned back. And if we looked at my screen time on my phone, I probably shouldn't, but I'm betting Apollo is at the very top.
Well, that means a lot. And honestly, that's kind of the cool thing about Reddit and the app platform is that Narwhal's a great app, and there's tons of great apps out there, and some apps are just you just fit a mold better for you personally. And that's what I've kind of always loved about it is you have that choice to go out there and say I like my spaghetti extra chunky. I like it thin. You can really play to your tastes. And yeah, I'm glad to have you, but it's just nice that there's so many options out there.
Yeah. But you really have created. I don't want to undermine your accomplishments because it is a fantastic app, and I think most people probably believe that, given that, as far as I'm aware, it's pretty much the most popular Reddit app there is, period, beyond the official app. And that's happened fairly quickly. I mean, when did development start on Apollo?
I want to say 2015 is when I started. It was the year I graduated university, and I think I was trying to put off getting a big boy job as long as I could. And I was using Alien Blue at the time, big fan, but I was kind of looking for something that felt a little more iOS-y, and if Apple themselves built a third-party app. And that kind of was the jump-off moment for me. So I started building it then, and I posted about it a little on Reddit, and it got traction from there. And soon enough, I was kind of figuring hey, I finished university, maybe I can see this through and see if there's any this has any footing. And thankfully, there's enough people with interest that it seems like it did, and up until now, it's been going as smooth as could be.
For sure. And based on what I kind of found in my research, it released in 2017, which made it, it's been around for 6 years, but it was by no means the first third-party Reddit app. I mean, third-party apps for Reddit had been around since the beginning of Reddit. It's much of what helped Reddit's growth, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. I mean, Reddit's own app, you just mentioned it, Alien Blue, was a third-party app acquired by Reddit and turned into the official Reddit app. So for
it's
years,
crazy.
Yeah, for years, Reddit depended on developers and on third-party apps for the website to be successful on mobile. And now I wouldn't be surprised if mobile is where Reddit is primarily consumed.
Oh, that would not surprise me at all. It's been such a shift, and it's funny you say the long period because I'm sure apps like Reddit is fun that have been there probably since 15 years ago. Those are some of the juggernauts who have been around forever that are kind of at the crux of I'm talking to them days like today, and they're feeling this pretty hard too. So
Yeah.
they've kind of like Apollo 6, sure, but yeah, these juggernauts have been here for 15 years almost.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you've built up rapport in the last few days with other Reddit app developers. But what's your relationship been like with Reddit during your development of Apollo and in the years since its release?
I don't know if I've said it publicly, but funnily enough, pretty much the day I released Apollo, I got an email from someone at Reddit that said, "Hey, Steve really likes the app. Spez, who's the Steve Huffman, the CEO.
Yeah, CEO.
Would you be interested about like talking about potentially coming working at Reddit?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so flattering! Like, let me talk." And then we talked, and they were very kind. And it basically ended up that like I really enjoyed building Apollo. Just even from the launch day, like the figures seemed like it would eclipse what Reddit was offering me as just like an employee. So I think I politely declined. But I think ever since then, we've kind of had like a good working relationship. It hasn't been like we hang out on Zoom calls every week or anything, but there's back and forth over email a few times a year where they'll give me updates on things that are coming. And it's all been very cordial. Like they've been great to work with. And I've really, like, honestly, up until this week, it's been a phenomenal experience working with them, just in how candid and forthright they've been with any changes that are coming or whatnot.
Wow. So, yeah, this week hasn't been great.
No.
I guess it goes back to about a month ago, right? I mean, a month ago, they basically, at least publicly from what I've seen, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it, but publicly they announced, hey, we're going to start charging for the API. And it's kind of the New York Times that breaks this story. And they even ask Huffman for, a response. And he does respond. And basically he goes, we've got these large language models, ChatGPT. We've got a bunch of this new AI stuff that's using Reddit to scrape data, because Reddit is this huge compendium of information and language from all around the world. Data that...
Right.
Despite being user-generated, I guess Reddit believes it's entitled to because it's posted on Reddit. So Steve Huffman, the CEO, says they're going to start charging for API access. But interestingly, at least as far as I read in the New York Times, they stated that Reddit's API would still be free to developers who wanted to build applications that helped people use Reddit. Did I get that wrong? Is Apollo not a prime example of such an app?
You did get that wrong, and I got that wrong too, because I read that back and was like, perfect. Like, I didn't get any foreknowledge of this, but it's good to know that they didn't reach out to me because I'm not affected. And after talking with them, I learned that by Reddit apps, they meant apps that, like, bots on Reddit that interact with Reddit and are hosted on Reddit, like I assume like a bot that would translate anytime somebody mentions pounds, they would translate it to kilograms, and Which is fair, I suppose, but I've never heard anyone call that a Reddit app.
Yeah, I would think of that
the
as a
choice
bot.
of words was, yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe they're gaining greater capability than they have before, but it was very curious that they used the word Reddit apps when they didn't mean what I would think 99.9% of people would think of when they say Reddit apps.
Sure.
So, yeah, that was definitely a little confusing.
So when did they communicate with you that there was going to be a problem?
I think it was about 2 hours after that post in the New York Times, and then a subsequent post on Reddit, that they emailed me and said like, "Hey, you want to talk about this?" I was like, "Yes, please." And it kind of went from there. I think that was April 18th, and we've had back and forths since then, and they've kind of been like, "Oh, pricing's coming. It was kind of one of those things where all of the Reddit developers I've talked to were kind of like, "It's great you're announcing this API pricing, but like, why is it a two-tiered approach? Why are you announcing it without kind of like the most pertinent detail?" So we've kind of just been waiting, twiddling our thumbs for a few months, waiting for them to kind of announce the thing that's the most important. And it finally came about 2 months later. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, okay. Did they feel that your app or third-party apps abused the API, or was it just that they felt that if you were commercializing their platform, they were entitled to compensation, or what did you perceive to be the issue? Or did it just seem more kind of abstract, as in, hey, this is a thing we're doing now, and this is how it's going to go?
I think it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I think for me, I think there's definitely a subset of developers I feel like they thought were abusing the API in some capacity, but I don't think it was third-party app developers. Like, I think this was people like maybe like the large language models you described,
Sure.
people scraping the website for whatever reason. Because they mentioned in the cases where people were abusing it that they reached out to those developers. And from all of the app developers I've talked to, none of us received that communication. So I don't think it was us they were talking to in that case. So it kind of, from my communications with them, I kind of got the impression that it was, you've built these somewhat successful businesses all based on data on our platform. And we kind of want a slice of that pie. And, honestly, at first blush, I think a lot of us were like, okay, that's fair. This completely giving this away for free probably isn't a long-term tenable solution. And if there's a give and take here where we pay you, and then maybe some of the APIs that come out, instead of not being available to third-party apps, which has kind of been the case lately, they're suddenly become available. Maybe if there's a beneficial situation for both parties here, great, we pay you, we get something out of it. We're more than happy to talk about this. And that I guess ultimately didn't quite come to fruition.
Yeah, I'm just surprised, I guess, because it seems, at least with you, the communication had been fairly cordial. Because from the outside, and maybe I'm just cynical, but it seemed really anything but. I mean, the public hadn't really heard anything other than, quiet murmurings from you and other developers about what was about to come to a head. But 2 days ago, Flying Laser Turtle, which is a member of Reddit's dev team, comes out and says on the Reddit dev subreddit, hey, there's a bunch of apps in violation of Reddit's data API terms. It's time to get into commercial compliance, and so pay up. That's how I read it, right? And they cited as the gotcha, the problem, a, quote, long-standing limit of 60 queries per minute or 86,400 requests per day. And then below that, they had a chart of apps that were pulling up to nearly 500,000% higher than that limit that allegedly existed. Oh, was Apollo one of these apps on that chart?
No. So from what I haven't been able to get a direct answer out of Reddit,
Okay.
But indirectly, the post said that they reached out to the people here to who were the 500,000% to try to come to a solution where they could get that number down to something reasonable. Like I said, I nor anybody I personally know who builds apps received any of those communications. But beyond that, I heard someone emailed me and said, I'm privy to the data in that chart and Apollo isn't on there, labeled or otherwise. So I don't think so. It's from everything I saw, I've been very prudent in making sure that it's, the API is adhered to. I have a friend who builds the server component for Apollo that does a lot of the notification watching and the server stuff for subreddit watching.
Okay.
And we're very prudent with making sure we never bump up against the limits, that 60 requests per minute that you mentioned. Yeah. So no, I'm very confident in saying Apollo isn't on there.
Oh, good. Do you surmise that many of the apps that were on there were third-party Reddit clients, or do you think that they were unrelated applications that were used for, maybe as mentioned in the New York Times article, kind of scraping data?
Given that the I might be completely wrong, but from the folks I've talked to who build other third-party apps, none of them have said they received any communications, which Reddit indicated that they gave to people on that chart. So my understanding is from the people I've talked to, no, and I would assume it would be non-third-party app kind of malicious actors who were not really respecting the API rate limits rather than third-party apps.
Okay. So those that were not respecting, they basically say, hey, we've identified these parties in violation. We've contacted them so that they could make the required changes to kind of become compliant. And then they say, we kind of pull the rug out with not just them, they're the root issue, but also consequently, the API is changing and now we're moving to a paid pricing model. So tell me a little bit about the amount and how the API really works.
So that's a great question. I get fun, even when I started out programming, the term API was so confusing to me as a concept because it's such a broad term.
Sure.
It stands for application programming interface, but it just literally means an interface into anything. So it you could say to get to your clothes, the API is the closet door that lets you in. So in Reddit's case, the API is just it's kind of like a bouncer where you can go hey Reddit, could you give me access to the list of comments for a certain post, or could you give me a list of the posts in a certain subreddit? And historically, Reddit's been okay, you gave me that request. Here's the data you requested. Here's it back. And as you said, there is a limit of you can't request more than 60 requests per minute or 86,400 per day. So I couldn't say give me all the posts in the subreddit 80 times in a minute. Like Reddit would be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So that's kind of the limit we've been within. And the change now is there's still that model, except the bouncer is now like, I'll give you your 60 or what have you, but I need a kickback for that. Or not a kickback, but I need a payment of sorts in order to facilitate that. That wasn't the case before.
Is that on the client level? Like if I'm an individual user of the app, or is that for you as Apollo, the entire entity?
So yeah, it would be through the entity. So you as an app user would be using Apollo's kind of like token. So it would be tied to Apollo. So the request would be made and there'd be like a 1/100th of a penny that would float up to me to pay at the end of the month.
Okay, that makes sense. So this pricing strategy is 50 million requests for $12,000. And
correct.
I'm assuming that requests basically tie in everything. If I'm logged in and through Apollo I upvote something, that uses a call request, right?
That's a
request, comment,
yeah,
and that's a call request. I open a subreddit, I fetch, I send a direct message, I moderate. Basically everything uses literally everything.
Yeah. And in some cases, multiple, where like there's a few edge cases where like you might submit something, and then in order to get to the status of what things are like after you submitted it, that's a separate API request. So there's some layers where sometimes it's even a multiple API request situation. But yeah, basically every like unit of action you can think about is an API request.
So if I were to fetch, for example, a subreddit, and I pull up, the big first, I don't even know how many it pulls at a time, 20 posts or whatever, let's say, is that one, or does it count that as 20 API requests?
That's a great question. So it depends on the API. In that case, you can specify how many you want. So it's up to 100. So you can request 100 or 10 or 5 or 1, and it'll give you that. And regardless of how many you request, that is one API request.
Okay.
And there's other ones like that where I can say, that like there's a feature in Apollo where I can say like hide all the posts above where I am in the feed because I've read them, I don't want to see them anymore. If you have 50 posts there, that's thankfully not 50 API requests. That's one API request where you basically say you bundle all these up and then throw it to Reddit and say get rid of these, rather than like you could go one at a time for sure, but it would be inefficient for both parties. So there thankfully are API endpoints where if it's kind of like a bulk action, like loading a bulk amount of posts or hiding a bulk amount of posts or getting information on a bulk amount of posts, you can do that through one API call.
Okay, so it sounds like, there's a lot of actions that require a lot of API calls, but there are some calls that return quite a bit of information. So at least as someone who's not a sophisticated developer, 50 million requests, I mean, yeah, sure, it's $12,000, but that sounds like quite a bit of information. Like, how many requests is Apollo really using?
Yeah, it's using, it scales with your user base, right? So it's Apollo last month used about 7 billion. So yeah, it's measuring 50 with an M, so we're talking with a B.
So that's like that's like what, almost $2 million a month in API calls? With
yeah,
this new
yeah.
That's kind of expensive.
Yeah, like and one of those things where I was trying to think like logistically, I wouldn't even know how to pay that. Like even if I had way more money than I did, I don't know how that would work.
I was wondering the same.
Need some.
I was like, do you have like a briefcase that you fill up with?
Yeah, or like one of the black label Amex cards or something
that's right.
Make that happen or something.
So many points. Wow. Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. Like at that scale, I don't even know how you transact stuff like that. Millions of dollars in currency a month sounds difficult and messy.
And unfeasible.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, right? So you kind of talked about other API calls that you pay for. Imgur was amongst them. I think you said for the same amount, 50 million requests, it was like $160 or something like that?
Yeah, exactly.
And Reddit wants $12,000 for that.
$12,000, so a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in the back of a few of our heads, we were kind of like, Imgur is, for the uninitiated, is honestly pretty similar to Reddit. It's a site where you can post photos, videos, you can comment on them. There's a lot of overlap between users just because they've been so tied into each other for so long. Before Reddit had image uploading, people would use Imgur. So it's a very similar analog. So a lot of people were kind of looking at that as kind of the benchmark for this is what the cost will be. And my plan, thankfully, it's a grandfathered plan that's a bit cheaper. But even if you look at the plans Imgur has available today, they're substantially cheaper than what Reddit's offering. So it was kind of leaps and bounds above kind of the benchmarks people set in their heads.
And I guess APIs, I mean, they do cost money to run, and they're serving bandwidth,
100%,
right?
100%.
And so, but at least from the outside, I'm looking at something like Intern. I'm like, wow, they're using significantly more bandwidth than Reddit probably is, because it's almost purely multimedia, where Reddit is in many ways largely text. I mean, they host video and images, obviously, but so I guess to play devil's advocate, APIs, they cost Reddit money. Reddit said in their own post that they pay tens of millions of dollars annually in server and API maintenance costs, which includes legal and a bunch of other crap, that affords the ability for third-party apps like Apollo to operate. And so, I mean, pay up. Additionally, I guess Apollo users, they're not served ads, right?
No, that's true.
Is that because you strip ads from the API, or does the API not even serve them?
No, the API doesn't even serve them. It's just never something Reddit's done. They've never injected them into the API feed. There's not even a way, if you were interested in saying like working at something with Reddit where you did show them. So historically, some developers, like I know the Narwhal developer does, and a lot of the Android developers do, they use like AdMob with Google, and they'll integrate those ads kind of manually into their own feed. But even that is an option. Reddit kind of said no more to that either. So
yeah, and I understand that, I guess, from Reddit's position, because that's generating revenue for the app developers. But
right,
I guess big lost opportunity. In my opinion, Twitter had the same issue where they're like, this API costs us a fortune and we don't make any money from it. It's like, well, you probably could. You're just not choosing to do that. So I guess they're not serving ads. They can't mine data from behavior and session tracking like they probably do in their own app. I don't know, but I would assume that they're likely to be doing that. They are, which is probably data that they can then monetize. So I guess what's the problem with Reddit seeking monetization?
I think it's like anything. Like I agree that they should seek monetization. Like it feels weird to be building a business off something that's keeping something completely away for free. You're kind of just waiting for the floor to fall out from under you.
You're speaking.
I think it's kind of. Yeah. But I think it's one of those things where the proof's in the pudding. Like in a similar way, if YouTube said like, yeah, of course we need to split ad revenue with creators, but we think the split that's fair is 99.9 to 0.1. And you would say like, yes, I agree. You deserve to be paid as the proprietor of this platform, but I don't think the 99 to 1 ratio is exactly fair. And I kind of think that's what's happened with Reddit, where I don't think there's many people who say, I'm an app developer, I'm entitled to this data as like a constitutional right. That's not the case at all. It's just like, if there's a price, it has to be something that's feasible. Like, because most of us are like, you don't make any money if we fold from this, which is like a very big reality here.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
and I guess, so then what's the benchmark? Maybe their target is to make as much money off of a Reddit user that's utilizing a third-party client than a Reddit user that uses the primary client. But you did some napkin math that I find hilarious. I'll just read it out again. It says, less than 2 years ago, Reddit said they crossed 100 million in quarterly revenue for the first time ever. If we assume, despite the economic downturn, that they've managed to do that every single quarter now, and for your best quarter, you've doubled it to 200 million. Let's also say that let's also be generous and go far, far above industry estimates and say you made another 50 million in Reddit premium subscriptions. That's $550 million in revenue per year. And then let's say an even 600 million. You're just moving the benchmark further and further. In 2019, they said they hit 430 million monthly active users, and that's also being generous. So let's say that they haven't added a single active user since then. If we do revenue per user calculations, the more users, the less revenue each user should contribute. So at generous estimates of $600 million and 430 million monthly active users, that's $1.40 per year per user, or 12 cents per user monthly. And what do they want to charge you?
It would work out to about $2.50 a user. Yeah.
So 20 times what they could expect to generously return from the average user on their own platform with their own apps.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem fair.
And, no. And like, it would be easy to go to like, different blogs and where they try to estimate what Reddit's traffic is. But in this case, they're literally blog posts where Reddit's saying these are our numbers.
Yeah.
So it makes them a little more trustworthy than random third-party sources.
Yeah, well, and they're trying to IPO, and so if anything, these numbers are maybe a little bit. maybe a little bit more pretty than they might actually be. So this all lands, and as everyone can probably assume, it goes over like a lead balloon. It gets national, global headlines that I'm sure you've probably, at this point, been tired of it. I said it again in this video because it's just such a good number. But you search $20 million on Google, and the first 50 results are about you and Apollo. So, I mean, I think you even said that your parents said they saw you on CNN or your name on CNN.
Yeah, well, they saw that. Yeah, they saw it. Thankfully, it wasn't on the TV, but they saw the article on CNN. We're like, "What?
That's
what
amazing."
But,
I love that.
Yeah. I've never quite made it to the sphere where they would it would cross them.
That's funny. Okay, so, bad moment, black eye. Reddit, of course, just ignores it, right? Not really. It kind of seems like they've gone a little bit on the defensive. At least Flying Laser Turtle, who, as we mentioned earlier, is kind of the I don't even know their title or their position, but they're certainly in charge of Reddit development, it seems, right?
I honestly don't know the titles either. They're speaking in some company capacity, though. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Officially, certainly. So this individual comes back and basically says, "Hey, y'all should be grateful that we're giving you an API at all. And if you're a good developer, you should be able to provide access to our API for about $1 per user per month." Let's just set aside for a second that still sucks. Because I'm betting a vast majority of your users are not paying anything. Because Apollo you can download for free, right?
Correct.
And then, if I remember correctly, you've got Apollo Pro, which is $5, right? And that's just a one-time purchase.
Right.
And that unlocks pretty much like most of the other features.
Right.
And then in the last, couple years, it's around when I started using Apollo. The last couple of years, you announced Apollo Ultra, which is $19.99 a year.
I think it's $12.99 a year, actually.
Yeah, so even less. Okay.
Yeah.
So $12.99 a year, and that offers push notifications, which I'm assuming those also cost you money, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that was the original reason for it being a yearly, monthly cost, was just because service costs money.
Okay, so let's pretend you're not paying money for that. Let's just for fun, let's say you're milking 20% or $20 per year out of all your Apollo Ultra users. What can you even guesstimate, or would you be comfortable guesstimating what percentage of Apollo users pay for Ultra?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I want to say it's somewhere around 10%.
Okay.
That's
way more than I would have thought. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
But
no, it's not bad.
But still, okay, so 10% of your, let's say for fun, this is not a fun experiment at all. I feel sorry for you to be doing this, but let's say you just go, okay, I'm resigned to the fact that just you have to pay for Apollo now. It's $20 a year, and that's just how it's going to be. My user base is going to be cut, basically to 10% of what it was last month. But there we go. That's still not really tenable, because after Apple gets its cut, that's $14 that comes to you. And then if you're paying $1 per user per month, which we can talk about that in a second if that's even possible, that gets you $2 per user per year. Thanks for your hard work.
And it's almost trickier than that, because there's a certain amount of, like, I could even increase the price slightly to make that better.
Sure.
But there's a certain amount of users who, like, say, subscribed 2 months ago when none of us knew any of this was happening for a year. So they're kind of entitled to the next 12 months of service.
Right.
And they've locked in that price.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of entitled to pay, even if I'm losing money on it, pay for their API usage for the next year.
Expectation.
Which might put me in the red, will put me in the red, which is the tricky part.
Reddit specifically calls out Apollo as being inefficient. They say that Apollo uses about 345 requests per user per day, while another app, Reddit is Fun, one you mentioned, one of the oldest Reddit apps there is, uses only 100 calls on average per user per day. And then, beyond publicly calling you out, they say, quote, Apollo is less efficient than its peers and at times has been excessive, probably because it's been free to do so, end quote. Have you ever tried to lower your API usage?
Yeah, we have. Like in the server situation, for instance, that's a big API usage, just in terms of, not maybe in terms of overall percentage, but it's one of those areas that feels like it's higher than it should be. I guess as an analogy, the way Reddit notifications work, just for your inbox, like you get a message or something.
Okay.
They work insofar as if I, the developer of the app, want to say, make sure that you get that notification within 10 seconds. I have to be checking Reddit every 10 seconds to go like, is there anything new? Is there anything new? Is there anything new? Is there anything new? Okay, there is. Okay, I'll tell them. Is there anything new? And then just repeating that ad nauseum. So you can imagine if you get a message once a week, I'm checking every 10 seconds, and then once during that whole week, I get that message, and then I can send it to you. So 99.99% of those API calls were wasted. So we've talked to Reddit, like my friend who works on my server and myself, and have said, like, what would be so much better is if we could just kind of keep like a port open with Reddit and say, like, you just tell us when there's a notification ready and we'll beam it off. We don't have to bug you all the time.
Right, that seems logical.
Right, and that's how a lot of services do it. It's like an event-based API. And that's just not something Reddit's ever given us. And we've also had situations where just the rate usage we get back, because whenever you make a request, they kind of respond back and say, like, request went through, you have 59 of your 60 left or whatever. We'll have sometimes get it back and it says, like, okay, your request went through, but just so you know, you used 500,000 and on one user. And we'll just be like, well, that's not possible if it's per minute. Like, there's no way I could feasibly have made 500,000. Or it'll be like the new minute will start and it'll be 2 seconds into the minute and it'll say, yeah, you're at 600,000. Like, ee. And it's just like, that's Reddit. Like, we've communicated with them, like, that has to be a bug. That's not physically possible. And there hasn't been a lot of movement there. So, like, there's definitely been moves to be efficient, where areas where maybe we haven't been as efficient as we could be because of how the API is built.
Sure.
But I guess fundamentally, I almost, I don't like the title that it's inefficient, because as you said, like, you get the 60 requests a minute or 86,400 you said a day. That's kind of been like the amount Reddit has allotted to us developers. You go beyond that, bad news, but that's what we're giving you as what's allowed. And I guess as an analogy to put those numbers in perspective, so of that 86,400 a day, Reddit or Apollo on average uses 300. So scaling those numbers, if I was to say, like, hey, Quinn, can I borrow your Rivian while you're gone for the weekend? And you're like, sure, Christian, just use it less than 864 miles. And I go, okay, fine. You get it back, and you're like, oh, God, how many did you use? And I'm like, I used 3.
Yeah, you're like, I went to the gas station.
Yeah. And then you're like, whoa, you used 3 out of the 864? The guy over there only used 1.
Yeah,
What's
that's
wrong
inefficient.
With you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm saying, like, sure, but I had 861 that were remaining. Like, I didn't know the benchmark was the guy over there using 1. I thought it was the limit you gave me. So if I'm, you know what I mean? Like, it kind of feels like yeah. And that's like, because you can do cool things with a little bit of extra room that are really helpful. For instance, like with Reddit, you can say, like, it's no surprise to anybody, like the first 25 posts or so on a subreddit page, if you just ask for 25, that comes back a lot faster than if you ask for like 100. It comes back about 4 times faster.
Yeah.
So what I do in Apollo to make it feel a little faster is I request the first 25, and then as soon as those load, I ask for the next 100. So you get those first 25 4 times quicker than if I just asked for all of them. And it's still completely within the API rate limits. I get 60 a minute, and I just use 2. So that doesn't feel wasteful to me, but now I'm looking at that and going, is Reddit deeming that inefficient now? Where historically that's been completely, you're within your limits, you're good. And it's stuff like that where is that inefficient, or is that making efficient use of what you did have?
Yeah, I don't think so. If it falls within the limits and the parameters that's been set by them, and by a long shot too, one would think that would be great, because it makes Reddit a better experience for its users. You've talked about how there's concerns about how they measure API calls. You said that sometimes they'll return 500,000 or 600,000 requests when that's not even doable. And now it gets to the point where they're presumably charging you for those, right? I mean, thankfully, I don't think that would be the case. I'm certainly going to consume 500,000 or 600,000 this month. Sure.
But I don't think those bugs, I think, were in a reporting back to you mechanism. I would hope they weren't in a recording mechanism, if that makes sense. Okay. I think some wires got crossed, but fundamentally it meant we couldn't trust the data we were getting back in terms of measuring how much we were using, because you rely on the Reddit API kind of just be like green light, red light kind of thing. And when it was saying red light a lot of the time in ways that made no sense, it made the data hard to trust.
What I thought was interesting is you talked about how Reddit measures its API calls. You basically said, hey, you're throwing all of our data out on the table. You've brought me into the public square and said, hey, look how inefficient Apollo is. But you performed your own tests and found that their API calls were fairly similar to yours, right?
I would say they were well beyond mine. Like I only scrolled around for a few minutes, and like yeah, it was like I think around 150 requests just in those few minutes. And I'm sure a lot of that is because Reddit has like more tracking and whatnot.
Sure.
And I don't know what all those APIs are because a lot of APIs that have been made available recently haven't been made available outside of Reddit.
Sure.
So I don't know what all the API calls are, but you can like put like a network traffic sniffer and see like these are all the calls that the app is making, and there's certainly a lot of API calls Reddit's making. So and which I have no problem with. Like
Sure.
to be
it's,
fair,
it's
it's
their
just
app.
kind
They
of
should
like
be
if
able to
we're
do what they
comparing,
want, right?
yeah. It just doesn't feel like an apples to apples comparison. Otherwise,
that was the story of Twitter the last, 6-7
Right.
years, where third-party apps still continue to function, but even when they brought out the version 2.0 API, which brought in a bunch of features that had been missing for years, like being able to view polls, you still couldn't participate in them. You couldn't join Twitter Spaces, and the app still became kind of feature emaciated because of how those APIs weren't brought to third-party apps. So
I think almost to the same extent that the price is an issue here is that the timeline is an issue here. They're going to start billing us in less than 30 days.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it would be like, okay, if I'm at an average of $1 per user that I have to pay Reddit a month, and 30 cents of that also goes to Apple. So just even if I charged $1, I'd be in the ground 30 cents. But if I'm like, okay, my solution to that is I'm going to raise everything to $2, so I have a little bit of buffer room there. Like I said, with people who have like already unlocked a year subscription, they have like the next 11 months locked in at that price that I can't touch, nor should I be able to. Like that's fair. But so the transition period, or I guess lack thereof, means that for all those people, say there's, I think Apollo has around like 50,000 of those yearly people who on July 1st will start costing me $1 that I won't get any money from until potentially like next, April 2024 or something like that. And so those 50,000 people, that's going to be a $50,000 bill just for them alone to Reddit every month in 30 days that the clock's ticking down for, basically. And that's what makes it tricky insofar as like I might be able to, if they gave me 4-6 months, I might be able to increase prices, make it up on monthly users, have enough people slowly whose yearly subscription maybe renews in September, could re-up at the higher price. I'd have a little bit more buffer where that 50,000 wouldn't all hit me at once while I'm scrambling.
Yeah.
And at the current state, like the price is almost irrelevant. Like it's going to be such a gut punch July 1st that it's hard regardless of what the price is. And, and it's one of those things that even beyond the pricing, like I don't know why they did it like that. If you take like a common example in our community is Dark Sky, which Apple bought. They were like, okay, 18 months. Like the carrot, weather people and everything were like, okay, we got 18 months to get a new API that replaces Dark Sky. And then Apple at the end of it gave them another year. Like I think it only went away like a few months ago. So you're looking at, what is that, 30 months of downtime versus literally 30 days is honestly brutal. And I think that's kind of the factor that's going to sink a lot of us more than just even the price.
It's inconsiderate, and I think that it's probably something that might have even gone over their heads. Wasn't even something that was considered, but it's downright rude because in the instances you've explained, let's say I gave you, and I should look, I'm subscribed to Apollo Ultra. I don't know when I'm up for renewal, but let's say it was February. I gave you $20 and you got 14 of those $20, more or less. That was already paid out to you, right? But if you can't provide those services and you just go, hey, look, I literally can't afford to do this, and this is what many of the Twitter apps did, they just basically go to Apple, and then Apple says, well, okay, we're going to give that money back because you can't provide the service that they paid for. So they just auto-refund you, and that's potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars that you've already been paid out that you thought was your money that Apple's going, no, we need that back. Or the option is you're screwed and you have to pay Reddit way more than you think.
Exactly. And I mean, honestly, like as Apple and as users, like I don't exactly fault them for like looking after users in that way. Like, I guess that is one of the benefits of them acting as the middleman for subscriptions,
it's good.
But fundamentally it is brutal. Like you said, I like back, if I got you to subscribe in April, Ooh, here's my cat. She if I get you to subscribe in April, like that price was based on what I believed my costs were then.
Sure.
And if the costs suddenly shift and I have no opportunity to adjust my prices to meet that, it's brutal. And it's weird too, because like I understand if Reddit was like, we didn't realize you would need more time. But in our talks, there's just been this like almost sudden stonewall where they're like, this is the price, this is the timeline. Please stop, bothering us about changing it. Like, this is what it is. And it's like, I don't understand why it's been, like you said, literally 15 years of this API, and it's like 15, 30 days to change everything. It's like, what is there like?
It's not even like it was something that they had forgotten about or was, something that they didn't really like but existed. They've actively encouraged people and you for years to keep doing it.
Oh, 100%. Like they've been great. If the big API changes coming down the pipeline that might break something, they're like, hey, we just want you to know, like, subreddits are adding a requirement that you have to have certain words in the title in certain subreddits, and Apollo might break if it doesn't consider that error. So we just wanted to let you know that that's coming down the pipeline. Ruby, stop hitting that. She's yes, and it's stuff like that where they've been very forthcoming and helpful, where they didn't necessarily even have to be.
Yeah.
So I've genuinely enjoyed working with them, but it's it just suddenly became like very different in a very short period of time.
So let's say changes do start to happen, and there is enough, kind of frustration, and they have a sudden change of heart, which, based on what you said, doesn't really sound like it's going to happen. Can you even really offer the full Reddit experience anymore? I mean, it's my understanding that, for example, sexually explicit content won't be served through the API even if you pay, which, while not for me, that's not a part of Reddit I'm interested in. It is a huge pull for millions of users, no?
Oh, 100%. And it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like we would almost be more accommodating as developers if we were kind of like, what's the reason you're doing that? And there hasn't been a clear answer for why, because they've said, like, we want to put additional like guardrails in to make sure that like the wrong people, like a kid or whatever, doesn't see content that they shouldn't, which is like fair. And they've got mechanisms in place currently, like quarantine subreddits, for instance, where you have to go into the official app or the official website and kind of like check off that subreddit and say, I'm okay to view this through the API. And then it becomes accessible to third-party apps.
Don't you have to be logged in to see that information anyway?
Yeah. And beyond that, you have to go like one additional step forward for quarantine subreddits. So they kind of already have this mechanism in place where third-party apps can't access something without a user explicitly saying, I want this. Yeah. And so it's kind of a question of like, why not just do that for the other explicit content? Like you have this system already in place, and they haven't been able to give an answer there. And it's strange.
Is that everything tagged NSFW, or do they have greater filters?
Thankfully not.
Okay.
So from my understanding, it's on a subreddit basis.
Interesting.
With very few exceptions, if a subreddit is marked not safe for work, it's explicit in some. There's some very gory subreddits that aren't sexually explicit in nature that fit that, but they're kind of the minority. But insofar as if you had a medical issue and you wanted to post a picture of something that might be a little gruesome, so long as the subreddit wasn't like, show me your disgusting holes so I can enjoy that or something, like that would be completely fine and still within the API, thankfully. Or if you were to post somebody who like got hit in the head with a basketball and a tooth flew out, and that's a little gruesome, like that would be completely fine. It's just at the subreddit level, I suppose.
Well, that's good, I guess, because one of my favorite subreddits is chairs underwater. Have you heard of that one?
No. What's the
it's
short
just a
story
picture
on that?
of chairs that are underwater, and if the chair is fully submerged, then it's not marked. If the chair is not submerged fully underwater, NSFW, then it's tagged. And that way, the chair is half in the water, half not in the water.
I like that.
It's very entertaining.
Yeah, no. And people will like sometimes even flag, like, if there's like a sporting event where a team gets absolutely destroyed, they'll flag it as not safe for work as a joke. Like, and so I'm definitely glad they're not restricting that content, but just the fact that they already have this mechanism in place,
right,
for the other content, and that they're not using it without any explanation. It's something I've really tried to be like, can you explain this? And they're like, we'll try to get back to you. And I haven't heard anything yet.
Yeah, it's
and even
frustrating.
beyond that, there's not that content's missing, but there's also content missing, like you alluded to with Twitter, where if you can view a poll in Apollo right now, but you can't vote in it for whatever reason, that API is not there. And we were kind of saying to them as developers, okay, if we're charging or we're paying you tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year,
Give us the
could
features.
we maybe vote in a poll? And the answer was weirdly kind of like, oh, that's a good idea. Like, that sounds reasonable. Like, let me look into that. And it was kind of like, how is this not something that was considered from the outset? And how is this not something that now it's coming into effect on July 1st, you don't have a clear answer to? Like, this is kind of like table stakes.
Yeah, see, if that's the kind of stuff they didn't think about, there's no way they thought about your liability to people that have subscribed for the next year. I mean, that's what's frustrating about it, is it from the outside, it seems that they've done very little to actually talk to the people whom this is going to affect. And then they've done very little to give any reasonable window of time or grace period for you and everyone else that spent time making Reddit what it is today have a platform that's viable in the next 30 days, and not only viable, but not a liability.
100%. And it's funny, they've honestly, like, maybe they've not reflected that with their actions, but they've literally said on the phone call something to the effect of, one of the phone calls, like, for years we didn't have an official app, and we depended on you folks to come in and serve that medium, and for years we wouldn't have had anything without you. So they've, like, openly
And then they're like, thanks,
kind
go
of
to hell.
acknowledged and thanks. Yeah, like, in this kind of in the same breath, there's been like kind of this dichotomy of statement that's really confusing. And they've said to the effect of, like, we know, in a similar way, that's what's happened with Twitter. Once you disrespect developers or, like, do them wrong, that's not kind of a bridge that's easy to unburn. Like, it's really hard to get that trust back once you do it once. So they were kind of clear, like, we don't want to do that. And there's kind of this sentiment that they're like, we're really surprised people are acting like this. And that's fair, but, like, it kind of feels like if you manage to accidentally burn all these bridges, like, maybe that's a good opportunity to try to talk to them and figure out how you can still salvage that while it's still possible. Because, like, all their vocal intentions were phenomenal, and, like, I totally fell hook, line, and sinker, I suppose. But it's just kind of the reality of what happened at the end wasn't quite as rosy, I think, as the reality they portrayed.
Yeah. So how do you want to end this? What's your final plea, either to Reddit or to the people of the internet, or what's the end goal you're looking for?
Honestly, my goal would, at a fundamental level, is I just want to keep building. I enjoy building Apollo, like, from like just a simplistic level. It's fun to wake up every day and, like, tweak on a little thing that a lot of people really enjoy. I just want to keep being able to do that. And I would hope that Reddit would, nobody's asking them to even meet imagers pricing or drop it by a 10th-fold, 100th-fold. I think even dropping it by, like, 2 or 3 times while giving not even generous, but, like, a capable window to transition to the paid API would go a long way towards making everybody happy and honestly still salvaging this relationship.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where I hope they go with this, because there'd be very small concessions they could give that I think would go a really long way.
I agree. They can do better, and so I hope they do it. Reddit, do better. Well, Christian, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate Apollo. It's an app that I use every day. I love using it. It's fantastic, and I hope that in a year I can still be using it and not feel like anything even happened. Forget this was all a thing at all.
I hope so too, and it's great to be here. I forgot to say, but it's like you, DIY Perks, and Zyla Foxland, I think, are, like, the only YouTubers whenever anything drops. I'm watching that today. Doesn't matter what it is. Like, so it's a big fan. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm humble. Thank you, Christian. And thanks to you guys for watching. Thank you so much for your time. And as always, stay snazzy.